Some showed too much skin, some were completely impractical, and depending on who you ask, some just drew way too much attention to actors' nipples. These costume changes were a little too out there, even for Sci-Fi. When the first X-Men movie came out in 2000, the studio believed the public wouldn't be interested in brightly colored spandex costumes. Instead, the production dressed the team in black leather, much like filmmakers had done with Blade, in the surprisingly successful 1998 film iteration of the Marvel Vampire Slayer. By 2014, however, this trend had come to an end. So, when the RoboCop remake came out that year, the lead character's makeover in an all-black robo body just seemed silly rather than edgy. Fans also wondered why he kept a normal-looking flesh and blood hand attached to his powerful cybernetic body. The movie never addresses it in the theatrical cut, but there are actually two explanations for RoboCop's newly human hand. One is a visual metaphor. A human hand on the trigger of a police gun is meant to reassure the public that he's not a soulless machine. A deleted scene from the film offers a more superficial explanation, that Raymond Sellers believes in the ability to judge a man by his handshake and wants to ensure Alex Murphy can still deliver on this social contract.
Hey, can you save his right hand? My father always said you can tell a lot about a man by his handshake.
The film itself expresses neither of these, and in the end does the audience the favor of giving RoboCop a silvery makeover to match the original. David Lynch's 1984 Dune adaptation elicits mixed responses at best, but regardless of a viewer's reaction to the storytelling, few would deny its production design is awesome to behold, even if it's not always true to Frank Herbert's book. With an H.R. Giger-inspired biomechanical design, costume designer Bob Ringwood's moisture-conserving stillsuits featured in the film seem like an elaborately direct precursor to his work on his batsuit design for the Tim Burton Batman films. By comparison, when Denis Villeneuve mounted his production of Dune, the stillsuits looked quite lazy by comparison. This iteration of the design looked more like regular clothes with extra bits glued on, rather than form-fitting survival devices. The general idea was to make the stillsuits look more like something actual desert tribes wear today than to look explicitly futuristic and alien. Villeneuve got so much right that in the end, complaints about the costumes faded away, and the movie won 6 Oscars. Unfortunately, none of those victories were for costume design. Between the 1969 premiere of the final episode of the original Star Trek series and the first movie's 1979 release, both real-world and sci-fi fashion changed a lot. In the wake of 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars, bright red miniskirts weren't going to cut it in a serious intergalactic adventure. Though less garish, the Starfleet uniforms dreamed up for Star Trek, the motion picture, have failed to stand the test of time any better than their counterparts on the TV series. Tans and beiges didn't prove to be particularly attractive uniform colors, and some of the faux naval touches looked more like Carnival Cruise uniforms. What's more, the decision to sew the shoes into the pant legs resulted in pointless difficulty while changing. As costume critic Gavia Baker Whitelaw succinctly highlighted in her blog, Hello Taylor, it's the sheer impracticality from both a production and viewer standpoint that really sets these uniforms apart. It seems that the public's opinion on this matter was also shared by the cast. In William Shatner's autobiography, he also pointed out that the uniform got far too tight when the men tried to sit down.
Impossible.
Thankfully for all involved, the sequel's attempt at Navy-style formal wear proved much more popular all around. If there's one thing that can be said for the leather costume worn by Ben Affleck in 2003's Daredevil movie, it's that it's slightly easier to look at than the full-body blindfold worn by Rex Smith in the 1989 TV movie The Trial of the Incredible Hulk. Unfortunately, that's rather faint praise, and the 2003 costume ultimately turned out looking more like bondage gear than most super suits. It seems that the film's director, Mark Steven Johnson, was well aware of this fact, telling Yahoo that he found it particularly challenging to be faithful to the character's original spandex-heavy aesthetic. He explained, "We ultimately settled on leather because it was the most practical. Like, if you're riding a motorcycle and you go down, leather is going to protect you the most. But it was also easy for it to come off looking like S&M, and the horns didn't help." Johnson went on to explain that he credits the new costume worn by Charlie Cox in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as an improvement, acknowledging that it has a tasteful balance of protective practicality and that signature leathery style. For a character based on a kid's toy line, G.I. Joe villain Baroness appeals to some very adult sensibilities, usually clad in skin-tight armor or leather, with long black hair, ruby red lips, and glasses. She certainly has a sensual aesthetic. Many higher-end collectibles emphasize this erotically charged combo, and it's a popular look for cosplayers who can pull it off. Stephen Sommers, who directed 2009's G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, didn't seem overly concerned about having the characters look like their toy counterparts, and in the case of the Baroness, he seemed to have missed her appeal completely. Rather than giving her librarian specs that frame her eyes, Sienna Miller's Baroness mostly wears auto-darkening sunglasses. Additionally, her not especially contoured bodysuit is hidden under a trench coat half the time. Perhaps Sommers Summers was inspired by the classy looks of The Matrix, but fans were less than enthused about his treatment of the character. While there were elements of her character in the film that detracted heavily from the bad girl reputation she'd built up in the past, the misinterpretation of her costume was the most obvious sign that she was a Baroness in name only. For everything else he got wrong, at least Robert Schwentke's 2021 installation Snake Eyes gave fans a recognizable version of Cobra's favorite bad girl once again. After 2 movies as a strong leader who is more competent than the male heroes assigned to rescue her, Princess Leia Organa got captured and stripped down to a gold bikini by Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi. As Star Wars is one of the most iconic sci-fi franchises in history, this costume has already been heavily scrutinized and parodied in the media.
Is there a picture of you in my wallet wearing a metal bikini? God, I hope not.
Over a decade later, Kenner Hasbro finally made an action figure of Leia in the getup, and though it was officially labeled Princess Leia Organa as Jabba's prisoner, the fans quickly dubbed it Slave Leia. The first iteration of the figure proved hugely popular with collectors, though after a while the appeal died down. After Disney took over Star Wars, they quietly started phasing out that particular look in merchandise. For her part, the late Carrie Fisher surely had feelings of her own on the costume, but when asked by the Wall Street Journal in 2015 how she would explain the outfit to kids, she gave a very tactful answer. Tell them that a giant slug captured me and forced me to wear that stupid outfit, and then I killed him because I didn't like it, and then I took it off, backstage. Taking a cue from Fisher's sentiment about the bikini, Disney ultimately began describing Leia in that outfit as Hutt Slayer rather than a captive or slave. Long before Sony started making movies like Venom about characters from the Spider-Man franchise without actually featuring Spider-Man himself, DC tried to make a movie featuring a character from the Superman universe without Superman. In comics, the character Steel was John Henry Irons, one of 4 Superman-esque heroes who appeared after the original Superman's death at the hands of Doomsday. Irons didn't pretend to be Superman, but he wore a caped metal suit that made him resemble a literal man of steel and carried a large hammer in homage to folk hero John Henry. In the movies, however, he's played by Shaquille O'Neal wearing armor that even Tony Stark would reject outright. With no contemporary Superman on the big screen, the movie Steel depicts Irons as a brilliant weapons designer who must protect the inner city when a fellow soldier steals his arsenal and sells it to criminals. 9 years before Iron Man hit the big screen with a nearly identical concept, this inventor, upset with the misuse of this tech, develops a powered-up suit of armor to fight evil. Without Superman, the film ditched the cape, and in order to showcase Shaq's acting, Steel's full head mask got replaced with a metal cowl that strongly resembled Batman's without the ears. Evidently, the technology to do a full-body motion capture suit wasn't ready in 1997, and the cumbersome results speak for themselves. The Green Goblin has one of those costumes that works on the page much more easily than in real life. It's supposed to be deranged tycoon Norman Osborn in what's effectively a Halloween costume and mask. In the comic medium, that mask can be as expressive and realistic as any given artist wants to make it. In reality, a criminal in a rubber mask might be less visceral to see. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man tried to come up with an alternative that would make sense within the world of a movie, going with the notion that Osborn would wear green armor to increase his strength and design a helmet reminiscent of his own tribal mask collection. Unfortunately, fans derisively described the appearance as resembling a Power Ranger, and given their own tacky reputation in the early 2000s, this wasn't exactly a compliment. Willem Dafoe's committed performance helped people overlook their issues with the design, though many fans wondered why Raimi would bother to put a mask over Dafoe, as his face actually looks like a sinister goblin when he grins just right. At long last, in Marvel Studios' Spider-Man: No Way Home, he kept his natural deranged face and donned a purple hood to look more like the comics. However, in honor of the many fans of the Raimi movies, the power armor underneath it all remained.
I just want to kill you myself. Attaboy.
When Warner Brothers initially proposed a Catwoman movie, the idea was that it should star Michelle Pfeiffer in that stitched-up vinyl outfit from Batman Returns. However, by the time the film came out, the concept had devolved into Halle Berry dressed up like a psychotic hamster in a bikini. Well, unlike some of the other costume designers on this list, Berry's costume designer Angus Strothy seemed pretty satisfied with his work, telling Cinema Review, "There were so many elements to take into consideration because the catsuit is such a distinctive, almost historical costume. We did want to pay some homage to the other Catwomen, and I think we achieved a wonderful blend of the past and the not-too-distant future." While making the film, director Pitoff didn't feel bound by existing continuity, and parental backlash to the perceived sexuality of Pfeiffer's version didn't exactly help with creating a more faithful adaptation to the comic book character. The movie's Catwoman was an all-new creation named Patience Phillips in a city that definitely didn't resemble Gotham. It's possible that, due to these many changes from the source material, the movie did not become a blockbuster. Even so, it won Barry a Razzie Award the same year she won the Oscar for Monsters Ball. Between Tim Burton's first Batman and Batman Returns, Michael Keaton's Batsuit evolved from looking like an organic physique to plated armor. When Joel Schumacher took over as director for Batman Forever, the design reverted back to a more anatomical look. Emulating classical statues, Val Kilmer's initial Batsuit infamously sported nipples and a sculpted butt. However, perhaps because he reverted to an armor-styled sonar suit for the climax, fans really seemed to reserve their ire for the subsequent film, Batman and Robin. In this installment, George Clooney's bat nipples appeared to be even more on display. Costume designer Jose Fernandez explained to Deserto that his designs for Kilmer's look in Batman Forever specifically were actually an homage to Roman armor and the borderline nudity brought out by many of the skin-tight costumes from the comic books. He also noted that making the suit a lighter color for Clooney made the nipples more pronounced. Schumacher, a gay man and former costume designer himself, defended his vision, telling Premiere magazine in 1995, "It's my Gotham City, and if I want Batman to have nipples, he's going to have nipples." Considering fans were relatively quiet about Alicia Silverstone's sculpted armor as Batgirl, there's certainly a case to be made that homophobia played a part in the great bat nipple panic of the 90s. In comics, the Joker is generally a skinny, dapper fellow with purple coattails and a face transformed by chemical exposure to have white skin and green hair. Jack Nicholson's 1989 movie version stuck pretty closely to that look, as did Cesar Romero on the 1966 TV show. When fans first glimpsed Heath Ledger in clips from The Dark Knight, however, several aspects seemed off.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got them?
Rather than a bright splash of color against the darkness of Gotham City, Ledger wore a more muted purple, and the clown hair and face came from sloppily applied dye and makeup. However, once the movie came out and Ledger's actual performance nailed the clown Prince of Crime's personality, fans rejoiced. In the process, Ledger made cinematic history and ultimately earned himself a posthumous Oscar. Fans again worried when images of Jared Leto's Joker first hit the web, complete with the LA gangster aesthetic favored by Suicide Squad director David Ayer. Covered in tattoos and sporting a grill, he came across like he was trying to cosplay as a SoundCloud rapper. The logic behind this character's look was that, after he killed Robin, Batman knocked his teeth out, prompting the damaged tattoo on his forehead. Suicide Squad fared well at the box office, though was largely panned by critics.